Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Al's Vintage Toy Trains. I hope you're having a great week. So today we're going to touch on the topic of references. I had a subscriber or two over the past few months ask about references, so I figured I'd do a topic on it. And my job here is not to promote any one particular reference, so I'm not here to sway you one way or another, but to at least show you what's out there for references. I've been collecting Lionel trains now for about 25 plus years. And I've collected quite a few references and books that talk about Lionel. So we'll go ahead and do that for you. So I've got three primary sources. One of them is Tom McComas and James Toohey. They are the earlier references that I revert to, and they were primarily written in the 1970s. Greenberg's is a little later, so Greenberg's is another reference source. They have several different authors on their books, but in my opinion, decent reference. And then there's also David Doyle's. That is probably the later of the group. A lot of these are out of print, so in order to find them, you would have to look on eBay or Facebook Marketplace or other sources. And so we'll talk about that. Another great reference is obviously the actual catalogs that Lionel produced themselves. And I think that's a good way to look at sets and what was being advertised by Lionel. Can't always go by 100% by what was shown in the catalogs. In some cases, some sets were never produced that were shown in the catalogs. So we'll talk about that and some other books that talk about the history of Lionel and a good story line from them from the beginning to current times. And so without further ado, we'll go ahead and get into the reference. Again, I'm not here to promote any one particular author or group, but just to show you what's out there. All right, I'm going to start off with my go-to Lionel Trains Pocket Guide by Greenberg's. This is a publication that comes out annually, typically with updates and pricing. Sometimes they add new items that they reference. And so I usually pick one up every 3 or so years. Prices do fluctuate just a little bit from year to year, but over the course of a few years or several years, there may be some trends. Typically, the trend is downward these days, but not always. Depends on the items. So the values that are in this book are typically based on what a typical consumer would pay, let's say from a dealer or going to a hobby shop and they have used trains. It's typically going to give you the value that you would probably expect to pay. And it's just the opposite. If someone's going to buy your stuff you want to bring to a train shop or bring to a show and a dealer is going to buy it, well, he needs to make money. So he's probably going to pay you 40 or 50% at best, depending on what the item is. If it's a sought-after item, he is probably willing to pay a little bit more, but typically you're going to get 40 to 50% of the value at best from a dealer when you bring stuff in to be sold. So this is my go-to guide. Let's just look at some post-war here. And everything is based on catalog order. It starts out with a pre-war section, post-war section, and then modern section, which is 1970 to 1 year prior to when the book came out. So this will give you pricing to items up to 2023. I'm just opening this up to the post-war page. In particular, we're looking at the 671 turbine, and it gives you the different variations here from 1946 through 1949 and what you would expect to pay. And at the top, it gives you a good price as far as condition and excellent. And then, very good, you'd have to interpolate something in between good and excellent. So there's your ranges that it gives you. So let's say a 1946 turbine in good condition, you would expect to pay at least $40. They don't typically go that low from what I've seen, but you can usually pick one up in excellent condition for about that price that they're showing at $147. So there you have how it kind of works. Again, it includes pre-war, post-war, modern. It also includes Lionel corporate tin plate, modern tin plate, the club and specialty cars. It also includes boxes, and it also includes sets. So when you're looking up a set and what the set might be valued, it will, well, let's see, here's boxes. So you can actually look up post-war boxes, and we'll give you what the box is worth between good and excellent. And again, it's based on the catalog number. Let's see if we can get to the sets. Boxes, abbreviations, and sets. So for a set, it gives you the catalog set number or outfit number. Look at the top one there, 1537 WS. It's a set, freight set from 1955. And in excellent shape. I think this expects it to have the boxes with it. $508. So anytime you see a steam engine listed in the price guide, it also includes the tender that would normally come with that steam engine. So that would be as a pair typically. So it's a go-to guide and gives you an idea of what something might be worth. Again, something is only worth as much as what somebody is willing to pay. And but definitely a guide that I use on a regular basis. And like I said, every 3 or so years I pick up a new one. All right, next up I've got a few books from Tom McComas and James Toohey. And these guys came out before Greenberg's and Doyle's, which I'll also go through. So let's start off with this one. I've got 4 out of a series of 6, missing volumes 1 and 3. But this one here is just chock full of information if you're a post-war Lionel collector. And first off, it starts out with an introduction and then history about Lionel itself and how it was founded. So it goes into a few pages of how Lionel started up. Depiction of the showroom in New York City in 1952. That one is, I think, known as the Great 1949 Layout. And then jumps right into the F3 diesels. So they give you a good color depiction of what they looked like. They go in pretty good detail of how Lionel got to make these FMs and how they were able to convince Santa Fe, New York Central, and GM to help split the costs 4 ways with Lionel on the actual tooling needed to make these. So tooling was like 25 to 30 grand, and so it was a good investment for these guys to have their name on Lionel engines as well as the advertisements within the catalogs. And at that time, Lionel was producing close to 1 million catalogs a year, and just having the name recognition meant a lot to these other companies. So it was a good deal for all parties involved. So a lot of information about the F3s, and I think a pretty decent reference. All right, it goes into other aspects. We've got the GM switchers, we've got the Alcos, powered units. I enjoy collecting these motorized units. I think I have all of them here with the exception of the fire car and the burro crane. I think I've got all of the other motorized units that are shown here. Fun to collect, and this goes into a little background on each of them. Got stuff on passenger cars, the large passenger cars, the aluminum, as well as the Madison cars. We've got the small box cars, and these are kind of overshadowed by the 6464 series box cars that came out later, but this goes through each of the early styles. They talk about the steps being eliminated in 1950 to save on costs, and then just several pages of the 6464 series cars. So I think I picked up all these reference books along with some others. I might have paid 40 or 50 bucks, but to me it was well worth it since I've been collecting this stuff for a long time. I'm definitely no expert, so I need to rely on the experts to give me more information of what's out there and what to look for. So that's the main one I go to with Tom McComas and James Toohey. There's a couple others here. This is a collection guide in history for the modern Lionel made between 1970 and 1980. Again, I'm not much beyond post-war and pre-war. This is a unique book by this group, and it goes into the many different types of prototype engines that Lionel came out with, some of the mock-ups, some of the dealer stuff that was out there. So this is a different kind of source. Talks about the archives at Lionel, stuff that are, that's only one-off. Here's a Hiawatha that didn't come with a tender. It was a proposed 027 gauge Hiawatha pre-war, and again was never produced. Got some FM prototypes, GG1 prototypes. So it goes into these one-offs that are very scarce and very hard to find, and I think kind of unique. Armored Train, that's one I would love to have in my collection someday, but a good reference for the Lionel archives that they call it here, for mock-ups and displays, stuff that was used in the catalogs, stuff that Lionel didn't follow through with. So that's kind of unique. And then we have advertising and art, and this is pretty cool when you look at the old advertisements. It goes through the pre-war and post-war period. And here's the sales philosophy that Lionel had. This stuff would be sent to the stores for the salesman to read, and how to present Lionel trains. Gives you an appreciation for all the advertisement and marketing that Lionel put into their products. So to me, kind of fascinating to read the different advertisements. A lot of people don't know, but Lionel was probably the first manufacturer to come up with a slot car. It was, I think, around 1912. So here's an advertisement for that. So if you're thinking about slot cars, you can thank Lionel for being the first probably to do that. So again, all kinds of advertisements and promotional items, advertisements that were in magazines. So there you have it. So that's the McComas and Toohey collection that I've got. We'll move on to some others here. All right, next up, I've got references from both Greenberg's and David Doyle's. The Greenberg's references came out in the mid-1990s. The Doyle's were mid-2000s, I think around 2006 for the one you see on the right. The Greenberg's on the left is dated 1996. And these are my go-tos for post-war Lionel. Everything is labeled and listed out in catalog order number. It's also broken out in chapters. We'll start with the Greenbergs here on the left. And so you've got motive power. It does give you an introduction, but motive power with steam, it breaks it out by steam locomotives and then diesels. And then everything's in catalog order number once you go into each of these chapters. And then it goes right into the rolling stock, with box cars, refrigerator cars, stock cars, cabooses, cranes, flat cars, gondolas, you name it. And it includes passenger cars, and even has a glossary and an index. And definitely a great post-war reference. Here we go. Here's a whole breakdown on the types of trucks and couplers that Lionel came out with in a chronology order. So this is kind of helpful if you're trying to date your cars. There's the early coil couplers. Lionel transitioned to magnetic couplers in 1948, and by 1945 everything went to magnetic couplers. Most all of those were staple end type trucks, and then by 1951 they were changing over to the bar end trucks. So this gives you a breakdown on each of the different types of trucks, to include the later AAR plastic trucks. Even talks about the Scout trucks. So that's kind of a neat little breakout. And then we've got descriptions and more talking points and how to identify the truck type that you've got. Goes into the boxes, and sometimes that can tell you the year of your set when you've got the boxes. A whole breakdown on starting out with the Art Deco all the way to the last resort, they call it. And definitely good information, helpful for me. Like I said, I'm not an expert, so I always have to rely on the references to try to figure out where I'm at. Sometimes I use multiple references and try to interpret from the different references what I've got. So, and then just based on the index, it starts out with the steam locomotives. Here we go, the 200 series Scout engines. Starts out with the early post-war engines. Again, it's in chronological order based on the catalog number. At that time, it gave you an example of what they were worth. In the mid-90s was probably the highest point for Lionel as far as value, late 90s and into early 2000s. So you can't really, you can kind of use it as a guide as far as the pricing that it gives you here, but that's what I use the pocket guide for, as prices do fluctuate over time. And nice breakout of each, going chronologically, each of the locomotives. And here's a nice summary on the steam turbines from 1946 to 1955. And then if you're a post-war Lionel collector, this is kind of a must-have, I think, to identify what you got. Here's one on just the Berkshires, and gives you the timeline at the top from 1948 all the way to 1965, and breaks it out by cab number. On the electrical side, it talks about the motor, the drive, the brushes, E-unit, the smoke unit, etc., the wheels and drivers, the castings, hardware, and then the tenders that came with them year by year. That's probably one of the best tenders, is that 2426W, and that came with all the 726 Berkshires. So, wealth of information, and definitely a go-to guide. And then it goes into the diesels. We got Train Masters, GG1s. There's a nice little GG1 major variation little spreadsheet, and then gives you depictions. So definitely a go-to guide for myself. And then if you're into collecting sets, I would use the Greenberg's Pocket Price Guide initially to look up the catalog numbers, because it's pretty easy reference. Usually you start out with the engine, figure out what year you've got for an engine or a year group. And this book is based on the catalog year, so it starts with 1949, goes to 1969. Again, if you're into collecting Lionel sets, definitely a good reference. Talks about promotional outfits. I don't think they actually go through the promotional outfits, but talks about the infamous X. That's come up in a few topics in some of my videos. The X always designated something that was different from their norm. So depending on what it was that the X was on, it meant something. So we go into cardboard boxes again, kind of like the first one from Greenberg's, and it should just jump right into the 1945 era. So only one set for 1945, and then it goes year by year. So 1946, and it goes in catalog order number, and 1400 being the first item cataloged. What it was the 221 steam locomotive, retailed for $30. Gives you a breakdown of what was in it and what to expect. I will also tell you, here's the catalog date here and here. So as you're going through it, you can kind of figure out what you got as a set. I start with the Greenberg's price guide first, looking at the locomotive if I've got a set, and then I look at the parameters of when that locomotive was made, and then I'll go to the reference here, and I'll also go to the Lionel catalogs themselves and try to figure out what set I have based on the other cars that come with it. So this goes through all the cataloged sets that Lionel produced. In some cases, Lionel did not produce sets that were in their catalogs. And 1946 is a good year and a good example of that. Lionel had intended on coming out with the Hudson in 1946. Actually listed it in the consumer catalog that came out prior to, obviously, production of the trains, but was never produced. All right, this one's been written in by somebody else, but again, it's a reference, and okay to do that. There's the electronic set in 1947 now. In some cases, they give you a photo depiction of what's in that set. So a maroon roof FM, a little harder to find for a Lackawanna than the normal gray roof one, but shows you what the box looked like, what was in it, etc. All right, I'm going to jump over to the Doyles now. Doyles did the same thing as Greenberg, so they've got their book that they published. I think this one's 2006, with a lot of photographs. So kind of doing what Greenberg's did prior to them, but adding in a lot more photographs to kind of give you what was in the sets. This one is about the individuals, so the motive power and all the rolling stock from the post-war period. And then the other one is the sets. So they kind of do the same thing, just in a different way. How to use their catalog. They have their way of pointing out the differences in the coupler types and truck types. More trucks. And they have their depiction on the Lionel boxes. And I like to go back and forth between the references because they kind of have different ways or unique ways of identifying. Sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're not. And there we go. So this one starts out with steam locomotives, just like Greenberg's did. And they start off with tenders. So they go with all the different tender types. And I've used this a time or two. I've got a backup light tender. I've done a video on that previously, and this reference helped me out along with the Greenbergs as well as the Comus and Tui. All three of them talk about the backup light tender and have examples of what they look like. And then we go right into the locomotives, and it's in catalog order number. So obviously Lionel, for the most part, had the catalog number right on the cab of the engine, starting with the 221 and moving forward. So I think the Doyle's reference has a lot more photos, and a lot of the information is the same as the Greenberg's, but with, I think, additional photos. So it's the steam, diesels, and they go through the different variations as well, if there are variations. So again, just trying to give you an idea of what these references are and what they look like and how they work. So that's the engines and rolling stock, post-war, and this is just like the Greenberg sets. It kind of works the same way, but they use more photographs than Greenberg's does. And this one was published in 2007. And they kind of do the same thing as Greenberg's, starting out with the coupler and truck types. And then they use the catalog cover at the beginning of each of their chapters. So chapter 2 is 1945. Basically, you just had a little bifold piece of paper as your catalog for the consumers. Lionel was quick to put out a set in 1945 after World War II ended. And so they had one set that they pushed out. That is the set number 463W. So gives you a nice little photograph of what the set would have looked like, the box, the set box, and the individual boxes. In this case, you'll see one of the boxes is overstamped, probably a pre-war box, carried over to the post-war period. And some of the early truck types for 1945. Lionel, I think, had 4 or 5 different wheel types. First of the wheel types were the whirly wheels. So the earliest of the 1945 production trains came with those whirly wheels. And then it was deep dish, and then ultimately they came up with a regular wheel that was produced later on with the thinner axles versus the thicker axles at the beginning. And again, it gives you the catalog cover for 1946, and then it goes right by catalog number order. And I think Doyle's provides more photographs. And I found some errors in this in looking up sets. So it happens, especially in 1955, 1956, when Lionel didn't list out everything that was in a set in their actual consumer catalogs. So in some cases, they give you the catalog reference for a photo. And then it gives you a breakout of what you need, which is, what engine and which cars came in, that particular set. And in some cases, there are sets that would have different box cars, let's say, in them. It's possible to have 2, maybe 3 different types of variations in a set. And it'll talk about that. Greenberg's talks about that too. Just like my, let's go to 48 real quick. And I've got this 2143 WS set. It's a turbine set. And it does mention the backup light tender was included in the earliest of the sets, so it talks about that. Talks about the change in the tender. The 47 set came with a red transformer on the transformer car, and then 1948 it changed to black. So it gives you an idea of what should be in each set and what to look for. And again, it starts out with the catalog cover. and then goes through each of the sets, catalog order number. All right, so those are my go-tos for Greenbergs and Doyles. And here we're moving on to a few more post-war publications that were put out by Greenbergs. And if you're into Postwar Lionel, then you need something as a reference for your accessories in the post-war period. And I think Greenbergs does a good job. So this, I think, was published 1990, probably 96 or so, 94. In the table of contents, it gives you the operating freight handling accessories, the operating structures, space and military accessories, stations, non-operating structures and scenery, signals, signs and lights, bridges, trestles, tunnels, tracks and switches, transformers and controllers, and miscellaneous and replacement accessories. So kind of like the others, gives you a little acknowledgement and forward, and then jumps right into operating freight and handling accessories. So gives you the different variations, goes through, let's see, the 164 log loader, talks a little bit about the pre-war versions because they were first made in 1940, but were one of the accessories that carried over into the post-war period. So I think a good reference, and if you're collecting or adding accessories to your layout, I think it's a good reference for post-war accessories. All right. This one gives you the different variations of the oil derrick and pump, and different passenger stations. You know, it really does do a good job of at least listing out all the different major variations of the accessories. Here we're looking at, to the upper left, the 45, and it even shows the first year, 1935. It's got the lattice work pole. It was the only year that you had a little lattice work pole for the sign. All the others were solid metal. So it starts with the pre-war period in the cases where the accessories were made in both pre-war and post-war. So there's the accessory guide by Greenbergs. This one's written by Alan Stewart. And here's another one. That's Greenbergs, written by Paul Ambrose and Harold Lovelock. This is all the selected variations from 1945 to 1969. And so I think it's just as it says. It talks about variations. This one also goes into the post-war paper type cardstock boxes. A quick guide to dating rolling stock boxes. So it gives you a nice timeline and what to look for the boxes. And it starts right in with the Scout steam engines, and then goes through the variations. So if you're into collecting variations, this is probably a must-have for you. Here's a listing of all the Scout engines made, and the year they were issued, the boiler type, motor, whether it's a 2-position or 3-position, E-unit, if it's got a headlight and lamp, if it has smoke or not. For the most part, no. If it's got magnet traction or tire traction, etc., or just ballasted. So nice little reference spreadsheet there. So I think these are a good reference to have. Here we go with the tenders. So kind of unique. There's even one tender from the electronic set to show you the difference and what to look for. And then they give you a breakout of each of the different variations. Here's all the normal tender shells that you'll find. And a nice breakdown there on tenders. To some collectors, it's very important that you have the correct tender with the correct engine, because a lot of times when you go to a show or a meet, you'll find that they are often mixed and matched with engines. Here we have some of the Alcos. Nice little spreadsheet on the numbers produced, or at least the catalog series number, the 200 series Alcos, and the different things to look for. All right, diesel switchers, passenger cars, and again the different variations. I like the early plastic passenger cars from Lionel, especially the green 2400 series. I still don't have the yellow anniversary set passenger cars to go with my yellow Union Pacific 1950 diesels. So those are the different passenger cars that came with the general set. Madison cars. And large aluminum passenger cars. So lots of information if you're into variations. And again, Greenbergs. And this one I am just currently going through and reading. This one's called Greenberg's Guide to Lionel Trains 49 to 69 Behind the Scenes. And kind of all over the place as far as what they go through, but I got a lot of good information out of this, especially on the Madison cars. Bruce Greenberg is talking to one of the executives at Lionel, and some of the talks that he had. But he went into some things that I hadn't known or noticed before. Looks like the salesman sample set here for the this is before Lionel created the girl set. So there's the I guess this would be the boy set, the blue engine versus the pink. There's a dealer's F3 display engine. It's got the clear plastic body, and you can see that it's kind of yellowed with age over the years, but if you can find one of those, they're pretty valuable to have because not many of those were made. So it goes into the prototypes of the rocket car. Goes into the first set that Lionel made for the post-war period. A little history about that. I thought that was kind of unique. And the differences in the Berkshires, things to look for. Different tenders that came with the Berkshire. Nice little spreadsheet with a timeline of the Berkshire from 1946 all the way to 1966. And it may be very similar to the one that we saw in the other Greenbergs reference on Postwar Lionel. All right, so these are here's the stuff on the Madison cars. And I found that kind of useful. Again, there's another talk on the small box cars. It's similar but different than the other reference that we were looking at on the small box cars. All the different variations. This one I think was about 20 pages worth of stuff on the small box cars. So if you're really into collecting those small box cars, I found out that this would have been an awesome reference for you. And this is about as far as I made it so far in this book. So Hopper car is the next one that I'll be getting into, but another great little Greenberg's reference. All right, we'll talk about a few more here. Now, I've got a few more references here. They're pertaining to pre-war. So I've got David Doyle's Lionel. I think it really should say 1901 to 1942, because I don't think Lionel really produced anything in 1900. That's when the company was formed and started. And I believe that very first gondola came out in 1901 that was used as a window display. So this is dated 2005. And kind of like the post-war version, this kind of runs through how the catalog works, how to identify, and it starts with the 2 7/8 inch gauge, which Lionel made between 1901 and 1905. It was a different setup for track. It was only a 2-rail track. So a little bit different. And then the early cars for 2 7/8 gauge track. And then they go into standard gauge, 1906. It was cataloged all the way through 39. I believe it ended, I think they stopped production around 1938 for the standard gauge stuff. But it goes in catalog order number 10. Got the 33s, 34s, 38s, 42s. So those are all your engines. Most of these were electrics. There's the 408E. That was probably the top of the line engine for early Lionel. Just like the steam engine would have been, the 400E would have been pretty much the top of the line steam engine. So, and then it goes into the rolling stock, starting with the cabooses. So you've got all the engines, the rolling stock, crane cars, derricks, flat cars, and searchlight cars. And then gives you the different variations that are there. At least major variations. Alright, so that's the Doyle's pre-war. And here's some of my favorite engines are the 225s and the 226s. And I've got a couple of the 226s. The 227 switchers are kind of unique in that the catalog number is not on the actual cab. You actually have to go to the boiler to see the catalog number that's imprinted on the boiler front. And the difference between a 227 and a 228 was the coupler height. So there you have it. That's kind of like how the post-war guide worked. So started out with the motive work and then the rolling stock. And then some other pre-wars that I've got for guides. Got Greenberg's Guide to Lionel Trains, 1901 to 1942. Very similar to what we were just looking at with Doyle's. This came out well before Doyle's. If I'm not mistaken, I think this came out in the late 80s. Yep, 1988. And then they kind of break it out by 0 and 027 gauge locomotives, enameled freight cars, lithograph cars. So this is all pre-war stuff that I'm going through now. And then they even have a section here on catalogs and papers, so that's kind of unique to have. So there's Greenberg's pre-war. Here's Greenberg's pre-war accessories. So another good one to have. So accessories make the difference. So that's just an introduction. Buildings and industry, the bimetallic strip that Lionel came up with, the warning signals and automatic train control. Then we go into the stations and related accessories, the gate man, all kinds of stuff that Lionel made in the pre-war period. And it tells you the different or major variations anyway that Lionel had for these accessories. Alright. So, pre-war accessories by Greenberg's. And here's a nice little publication here by TCA. It's called Standard of the World, 1900 to 1943. And another great reference for pre-war. This one actually has a color sample chart. There you have it. So if you're trying to restore a locomotive and you know what you've got, this will give you the color that you're looking for. So kind of a unique little insert that came with this. And then there's all kinds of neat little tidbits of information. And this was originally, this one's a second edition, 1989. And then it starts out with O-gauge locomotives, the O-gauge cars, the paper train, which came out during World War II, at the beginning of World War II. Standard gauge locomotives, standard gauge cars, trolleys, steamers, tenders, special and unique items, 2 7/8 gauge, and double O gauge. And then the catalogs and other information. So kind of goes in period order and then catalog order number. Here's the 150 series, 200, there's the 700 electric, and then photos of each. And again, like I said, I use all of my references if I'm looking up something. Here's all your, a couple of the nice switchers. These are the semi-scale switchers. Some of my favorite engines are in here. There's the semi-scale Hudson here, 763E. And then goes into clockwork to include the Minnie and Mickey. Shows here 1935 to 1937 for the Mickey Mouse handcar, red, maroon, apple green, or orange base. Those were the 4 colors that it came in. Here's another description of the truck types, but in this case for pre-war. The different hooks that Lionel had in the pre-war period, the early hook, combination latch, and hook. That's got the latch. The late hook, box type 1, box type 2, automatic electric box, magnetic open operated. And then the rolling stock. And again, just another great reference to have. And here we have a couple of books on the history of Lionel. So I've got this first one here called All Aboard, the story of Joshua Lionel Cowan and his Lionel Train Company. And basically it starts out with the history of Joshua Lionel Cowan himself. You know that Lionel was his middle name. This book was written by Ron Hollander, and I believe it's dated 1981. So I don't think this is in print anymore, but there are plenty of these out there. If you look on eBay or Marketplace, I think you'd be able to find one of these. But definitely gives you a background of Lionel and how he was as a kid and how he got started into Lionel trains. And so I think this is a definite good read for anybody that is starting out in collecting Lionel trains. Talks about some of the other manufacturers as well. There's Carlisle and Finch. But goes into how he was raised growing up and how he got into to making trains. So definitely a decent little piece of history to read, and I would recommend that. Got another one here. It's just came out right after Lionel was 100 years old, and this is mostly pictorial with timelines and some highlights of Lionel over the century. And I think this was published in 2002. And Dan Ponzel is the name. And goes from the early years. And it's kind of snippets of information along the way up until 2000. All right. Here's another one. This is kind of unique. I picked this up about a year ago, and it's called Inside the Lionel Trains Fun Factory. So it's basically a history of the factories where Lionel started out producing the trains, and talks about each of those factories and what it was like. Some pictures of each of those factories. You know, starting out in Manhattan in the early years, and talks a lot about the cost of building these different places and how much he was spending on the buildings and property. Definitely an interesting read. The author is Robert Osterhoff, and I doubt this is still in print as well, but I think this came out, there it is, 2008. But lots of history and tidbits of information. Talks about the war effort contracts that Lionel had, where they were contracted to make wartime materials, especially during World War I and World War II. Lionel had a lot of major contracts just before World War II had begun, actually starting in about 1940, and then by 1941, I know they had, I forgot what it was exactly, but in 1941, around October, they had another really major government contract. And that's basically when Lionel pretty much stopped making trains and switched entirely over to wartime efforts. The factory wars. Lionel early on in their catalogs would show depictions of what their factories looked like. Sometimes they were embellished a little bit. That goes through all the different things that they were going through as they moved from place to place. And here it talks about the understanding the Irvington factories. I think a decent read, and in the back, I've got it tabbed out here. It's a timeline of the fun factories. Starts out when Harry Grant was working with Lionel Cowan, Josh Cowan. They were working together since 1896. They actually formed the Lionel Company together, and I'm not sure when Harry Grant split off, but it was probably around 1902 when the Lionel Manufacturing Company was incorporated in New York. This gives you a timeline of all the different places that Lionel was producing trains, starting here in Manhattan. 2426 Murray Street, Manhattan was pretty much the first place that Lionel was making trains. And they expand there in 1902. Lionel moves to 4-6 White Street in 1904 in Manhattan. So it talks about the different plants and places that Lionel was at, to include the major plants that they actually had built, as Lionel had become a large manufacturing company. So I thought that was kind of unique to see all the timelines of when they moved to different places or opened up into new places. And then there's another little appendix here that talks about all the patents that Lionel came up with and what they were for. So looks like a couple of hundred patents that Lionel came up with during the years. And so another good read. And then lastly, I think I mentioned catalogs are probably some of the best references. I've got all my Lionel catalogs just in little plastic sheet protectors year by year. There's 48, 49. So I've got all the post-war Lionel original catalogs. I think this is the only remake I have, which is by Greenberg, the 1945 catalog. But these make great references to see what Lionel was publishing and putting out as their advertised catalog sets. And then I've got a few of these. So Greenberg's, I think, has 6 different volumes, starting with 1901. I've only got the 3 out of the 6. So I've got the post-war catalogs, 1945 to 54. And this is just a reprint of the catalogs. Just tells you up in the corner what year you're in. And so definitely these are great if you don't want to touch the individual catalogs, because you got all the catalogs, in a group in one book. This is pre-war, so I've got 1933 to 1942. And I've got 1923 to 1932. Now, these can be rather expensive. They typically run on eBay. I've seen them run from $75 to $250, depending on the condition. These were not produced very long, so they're really neat collector pieces, because these early catalogs are really hard to find and can get very expensive buying them individually. And so this is a great way to have those catalogs, which are reproduced here in these books. So I find these very valuable, because I do not have many of the pre-war catalogs. I think I got the 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, and 42. Those are the only pre-war actual catalogs that I own. So catalogs are a great reference, and Greenberg's put together this nice series. And if you can find one of these, they're great to have. I think these came out, let's see, 1989 is when these came out. And then they have the copyright of each of the catalogs in there, but Greenberg's Publishing Company, 1989. So if you can find one of these, they're great. And then lastly, I'm going to finish off with a repair and operating manual. This is the post-war version, and just looking up at the table of contents, you look at the item you're looking to do some maintenance on, or you're missing a few parts. This will give you the depiction and breakdown of that item. For instance, your different engines. Just go to one here at the beginning, and gives you all the different part numbers. So if you're missing something, you can go to these parts guys and tell them the part number that you're looking for, and most times you'll be able to find the part that you're looking for with these guys. switchers. I use it because I restore a lot of transformers like the KWs and the ZWs, and so it's a definite must-have if you're a good size collector, because it gets very expensive if you pay for somebody else to do your maintenance. So I like to do my own repairs and maintenance, and definitely worth having. All right, so I'm not necessarily promoting any particular company. I'm just here to show you what's out there and what I have. And if you wouldn't mind, in your comments, you can list out anything you would also add as references for people to recommend. That would be great and would be appreciated. And so this pretty much covers the topic of references, and I appreciate your time, and I hope you have a great day. Take care.